Hello everyone, I've got a real random video for you today, and since Scarlet and Violet has just barely been out for 2 weeks, I decided to add this spoiler alert buffer. You know, in case you somehow accidentally clicked on this video, probably because you didn't expect me to be talking about Pokemon, and would rather not see Sprigatito's final evolution just yet. And this buffer will end in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so the first thing I would like you all to know is that I am not really a Pokemon fan. I know only very basic things about the franchise and how it works, and the only games I ever played were the Pokemon Ranger games for the DS, so yeah, that was a long time ago. The second thing I would like you all to know is that what you're seeing on the screen right now is not my redesign. This is more like a basic adjusted design. You're going to see my own more original design near the end of the video, but I'll explain all of that in a bit. First, I think we're due for a proper introduction here. So for those of you who are unaware, a new Pokemon game was released on November 18th, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, and with it came the usual complaints about how the new Pokemon have bad designs, and why aren't they more like the old Pokemon and all that. And as someone with a vested interest in character design, I couldn't help thinking about that question. What's wrong with the new Pokemon designs, especially when it comes to the starter evolutions? Why do so many people, myself included, find them consistently underwhelming? Fans have always been eager to offer their own answers, which I've never found very satisfactory. They tend to say things like, well, the problem is that they keep making the final evolutions bipedal. Pokemon aren't supposed to be anthropomorphic. But that's not really true? Plenty of great bipedal Pokemon have been around for years. The fact that any of the new ones stand on 2 legs or even appear humanoid is not the reason they look bad. Fans have also said things like, well, the problem is that the Pokemon don't look like a natural part of the world, so they don't make any sense. A good Pokemon design fits into the environment. But that's not really true either? There are lots of Pokemon that kinda just look like whatever would be interesting, even to the point of resembling man-made objects that aren't found in nature. Which I've always thought was one of the charm points of the franchise. The fact that you'd have these weird, outlandish creatures that are just accepted as part of the natural world. Like, of course you can just run into giant floating magnet creatures out in the woods. That's totally normal. There's one criticism I saw recently that I felt actually had some merit, and it's that the Pokemon designers focus too much on having a theme these days. Like a built-in personality that the final evolution just suddenly springs on you. Like, for example, Blaziken is a bird. I guess it's sort of dynamic and intense and cool looking, but it's still just a bird. Blaziken could conceivably have pretty much any personality or mannerisms you can imagine. The design merely suggests them, it doesn't dictate them. Meanwhile, Incineroar is a pro wrestler. You can't just ignore that theme, the whole character design is built around it. In my opinion, it's the only thing that lends real interest to it. The design outright tells you what the Pokemon is supposed to act like and think like. There's very little room for alternative interpretation. It's not an animal, it's a stereotype. And I can see why having so many Pokemon like those nowadays would be a downer. But the one problem with that criticism is that theming isn't really a bad thing in and of itself. There are lots of Pokemon that tend to act a certain way and represent a specific theme. It's another one of those things that's kind of a staple of the franchise. There's no real reason why they couldn't apply it to starter evolutions and still execute it well. In fact, in my opinion, it's already been done before. Oddly enough, I don't care that my little frog pal suddenly turned into a ninja when the ninja looks awesome. And I think that's really all Pokemon need at the end of the day, to look cool and fun. There's a million different ways to make that happen, and for any way that you might think is ruining the franchise, there's probably a universally beloved counterexample out there that you've forgotten about. Painting all the designs you don't like with the same broad brush doesn't work very well. I think it's better to approach each one individually, identify its specific weaknesses, and work outwards from there. Which brings us to Meowscarada here. So when I first saw this Pokemon design, I found it weak and underwhelming, which didn't come as much of a surprise to me, although I honestly expected them to do a little better than just a cat with a mask on. Like, that's what it looks like to me. It doesn't look like a unique fantasy creature. It looks like a big cat wearing a costume. And I think a large part of the reason why is all the empty space on this design. Like, most of Meowscarada's body is just blank. Its legs are blank. Its torso is blank. Its arms are blank. This is supposed to be a magician Pokemon. Why doesn't it look magical? Where are the details? Where are the points of interest? It's not necessarily a bad concept, but it's just really, really empty for no real reason. And in my work, I call that poor usage of space. What's there is okay, it's just not enough. It covers so little of the available space that design as a whole looks unfinished. Which is why the first strategy I came up with to improve this design was to just make the bodies smaller. And that's what I've been coloring this whole time. A slight redesign of Meowscarada with adjusted proportions. The body becomes smaller, so the few details that are there become bigger and fill more of the space. For instance, the bigger cape covers more of that blank torso and makes it less noticeable. If you don't have enough good ideas, reducing the space you need to fill with ideas is a valid strategy, and one I hope the Pokemon designers are allowed to take advantage of. Because it kind of feels like there's some unspoken rule that the starter's final evolutions all have to look 6 feet tall, and the designers are being forced to adhere to it even though they don't know what to do with all that space, so they just repeatedly end up looking like large animals wearing little accessories. Small animals wearing big accessories would at least be a little more eye-catching. Of course, in a perfect world, we should be able to expect much more than just shuffling proportions around to try to save an otherwise bland design. Because this is just what your average fan artist will do. Make some adjustments to the original design to have it fit into their art style, or just improve the overall look of the piece. And by the way, I think that's one reason why these designs can get away with looking as half-baked as they do. Because fan artists know how to make them look better, which tends to affect other fans' perception of those Pokemon. When you can see the potential that the design has, and you see lots of cool fan art that brings out that potential in different ways, and you really want and expect the original design to be good, it's easy to convince yourself that it is good, even if it really isn't. And take it from a Ruby critic, you don't want to go down that path. It's a lot cheaper and easier to make mediocre content and wait for your devoted fans to convince themselves to like it than to make the quality content that they actually deserve. And the absolute last thing you want to do is encourage that kind of corner cutting. Anyway, I think it's about time to unveil my real Meowscarada redesign. I hope you'll like it, but whether or not you do, I hope you'll understand the changes I made, because that's going to be our final discussion topic here. So first off, as you can probably tell, this design takes up a lot more space than the original. The flower around its neck is bigger, the cape is bigger, its feet are bigger, even the little hair things behind its mask have more volume. Pretty much every aspect of the design is allowed to feel big and weighty and important. Because one very common problem I see with these final starter evolutions is that they feel very afraid to make the designs feel big. Like maybe one or two larger details will stick out, like a fin or a tail or a few small bunches of hair. But pretty much everything else will be small and cling very close to the underlying skeleton of the body. There's nothing inherently wrong with that as a design choice, but I don't think it works very well for a final evolution. As I understand it, a final evolution is supposed to be like the epitome of the Pokemon concept. Like, you start out with a little grass cat, and you're supposed to evolve it into the ultimate big grass cat. To me, that evokes the image of a creature that looks like a grand achievement, something bold and striking and showy that screams, "Look at me! Look at what we've accomplished!" And I think that's what most people expect from a final evolution. But instead we get these timid, skimpy designs, and it's like, of course that's going to underwhelm people. Of course it's going to leave them disappointed. It's an anti-climax. You wait and wait to see what your little starter buddy is going to evolve into, and then end up with something that feels no different from any run-of-the-mill Pokemon on the street. Now, is making a design take up more space the only way to get it to feel like a big achievement? No, but it's arguably the easiest way, and one you really have no reason to not take advantage of as a character designer. So the second major difference between these designs is the idea of balance, spreading out shape language across the design so it feels even and intentional. If you look at the original, you'll find that it has quite a few different features, and each one of them is pretty much isolated. The mask is the only big spiky dark thing with a pattern on it. The front of the cape is the only other big spiky dark thing, only it doesn't have patterns, and it's right underneath the mask, so together they feel like one thing. The back of the cape is the only big curved thing, the neck flower is the only pink lobed thing, the fur shorts are the only serrated thing, etc., etc. And in general, when I see a design like that, the impression I get is that the designer did not know what to do. They didn't know what they wanted, and never got time to figure it out, so they just threw every idea they had at the character, and hoped it would all fit together somehow. In a way, this would explain why Meowscarada's body is so blank. It's hard to add detail when you don't actually know what shape language you want to emphasize for the character. For instance, I chose the spikes and the diamond pattern. You can see how I propagated it throughout the design so the mask would feel less isolated. Because I latched onto that specific shape, I was able to use it to decorate the character and create points of interest to draw the viewer's eye to certain parts of its body. I'm sure you could imagine other Meowscarada redesigns that latched onto different shapes, like maybe the pink flower or the curly design of the cape. And if that sounds interesting to any of you artists out there, I encourage you to try one. There's probably more I could say about this redesign, like why I decided to replace the illusory flower thing with a staff, or how I imagine the cape moves with its arms, but this script is already over 4 pages long, so I think we might as well stop here. Anything else you want to know, you can just ask in the comments. So, in conclusion, I think if there's anything generally wrong with some of the newer Pokemon designs, it's simply that they haven't been worked on enough. I don't think any of the criticisms I made are due to incompetence. Experience tells me that they're more likely due to a lack of time and/or energy. With the way Game Freak has been constantly rushing out new full-length games for a couple years now, I would not be a bit surprised if the Pokemon artists are just getting worn out. And that's why we're getting these lackluster designs. And until something changes in that respect, getting good designs is probably going to be a matter of chance. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, like, subscribe, whatever, and check out my Coffee page gallery to see the finished pictures in these videos. Till next time!